Hello guys! Welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we model and paint with the sole goal of feeling good and being happy. But as always, being very technical and nerdy about the process, because this is how my obsessive brain works. This wasn't meant to be a video. The idea was to keep this model for myself, or better, keep this process for myself. Not because there are any trade secrets in it, or exotic game-changing techniques. Well, maybe a couple. But you know that the ethos of the channel is all about full disclosure and fighting against any sort of gatekeeping. So the point was, just for once, to selfishly save the pure joy of the modeling and painting flow for myself. No camera, no setup of the shots, no technical at the time, no pressure, expectations or judgment. But as soon as I started gathering materials and tools, I realized that this would mean not having you guys, that in a strange way have become my painting buddies and word spread modeling club. And that this too would have been kind of a gatekeeping dick move. So, here is the full emotional and technical story of this process, shared with the hope of spreading a bunch of inspiration and good vibes. It's a lazy, midsummer Saturday morning. For a strange alignment of the planets, I'm alone at home. And as you can see, there's nothing to do outside. But throughout the whole Ireland, I'm probably the only one who doesn't care about this weather, because my plan was to paint the whole weekend anyway. Here, I'm trying to visualize the proportions of my scene, simply marking a chunk of basswood at different heights, and pondering on its interaction with the model. And I also mark a general idea of my lateral profiles, trying to imagine the final general silhouette and the depth of material needed to obtain it. At this initial point of the work, I just decided that I want a strongly vertical scene, to give the idea of the Beast Lord on the edge of a cliff, rallying a crazed horde of beastmen gathered below. But I still didn't decide any specific color, and my vision of the final result is only topographic and volumetric. That, in any case, is more than enough to start putting the work in motion. The point of this project is to indulge in something with absolutely no utilitarian goal, and all focused on a strong fun narrative. So, a gaming base is not an option here. Gaming bases, it doesn't matter if round or squared, have an obvious practical value for the act of gaming, but in the painting stage, they intrinsically bring a ton of not so subtle limitations to composition, lighting and storytelling in general, that we tend to don't perceive too strongly because this is the main way in which gaming miniatures are traditionally seen and presented. Basswood is cheap wood usually used for carving, that you can easily find in any model shop, or even on Amazon in practical chunky chunks. And because of its relatively stable and constant density and general softness, it's great to work with hand tools, or modeling level low power tools. And as a great plus, it also accepts and retains paint really well. With a bit of sanding, you can bring it to resin/plastic smoothness, and a good layer of paint on top will make the finish even smoother, and very, I didn't find a better term, factory-like. This is my absolute favorite step, and where the beauty of making your own plinths and scenic display bases comes from. I use my little faithful bench grinder to create a deep concave that will host the scenic basing material. One wheel has a low grit perfect for the rougher general shaping, and the other one is smoother for a slower, safer, and more precise work around curves that get closer and closer to their final look. This is the simplest application of this tool. And playing with angles and grit, you can obtain a bunch of cool effects that, if you like the topic of micro dioramas, we can definitely explore in the future. Let me know in the comments. And here are my foundation planes. I don't like the short one for this particular project, but I can easily see it used in the future for a less aerial and vertical little scene. Large bark chips are my absolute favorite basing material. You have probably seen this stuff on the grounds of public gardens and kids' playgrounds. And you can buy it in huge bags from any florist, gardening shop, or even a good hardware store. I'm still using a 2-kilogram bag bought 5 years ago, that it's still half full. You know, miniatures are small. The chips look like rocks or flint. They are structurally super solid and elastic, but they can be shaped, cut and drilled with extreme ease. And the best part is that they absorb super glue and PVA like a sponge. I also lock the model in place with solid metal pegs and super glue, so I can better shape the ground around the feet to make the relationship natural and seamless. I add a few details, like chaotic-looking spikes. The mandatory skulls of the dinner victims. More cool little random details. And a bunch of short vegetation inside every crack. And I close with a unifying pass over relatively fine textured paste. I already have a bunch of cool, realistic, natural textures and natural movement, so the real objective here is mostly to hide visible seams and junctions between rocks and details. Basically using the paste as a putty to get a uniform, cohesive feel that looks patchy now, but that a coat of primer will make into a single, solid entity. Don't worry, I never start slapping colors around without a well-defined vision in my mind. While refining the structure of the base, I discarded the craziest, a bit too magical color combinations. And I finally settled for a classic, more grounded, realistic scene. Of course in fantasy terms. Under a huge, were-beast-friendly, cold full moon, a bloodthirsty army of beastmen has been assembled by the thunderous call of the Beast Lord, and prepares to leave its torchlit camp in the mountains to attack the fertile domains of the humans. Ironically, this deep blue is not the foundation for the blue light of the moon, but the conclusive tone of the extreme dispersion of the flames into the night. And equally ironic, this violet represents mostly the warmer shadow generated by the cold moonlight, as a basic form of contrast of temperature that still remains more or less in the cold spectrum. On top of this base, I can apply the real red foundation of the flaming light coming from below, using a high unmitigated opacity, to sell the idea of the powerful strength of the light itself, able to cover everything in its path with that intensity. And the light blue glow coming from above. Again, that initial switch of tones makes the blend of the two sources more natural and seamless, taking in consideration from the beginning the hard turning points around the most vertical shapes exposed to both lights, and what happens on the outer edges of this relation, to avoid direct simple mixes and add extra complexity and fluidity to the composition. The foundational work is done, and now I can simply enhance the internal values and enrich the internal tones of the two bubbles of light. First, using yellow from below. And a super cold peak white from the top. And why not, also a bit of white from below, to push even more the intensity of the core of the flaming glow. I totally don't care about saturation at this point. As I'll explain better later, in this particular case, this is a brushwork affair. Here, I only need a general idea of the tones involved, and their rough values and macro structure. That desaturation is also a subtle preparatory element, super useful for the next step. In a complete change of perspective from classic miniature painting, that is kind of becoming my artistic signature, I set the local tones, the actual intrinsic colors of the materials, in transparency over the environmental light that moves to the first visual and procedural spot of the process. I didn't invent anything. Canvas oil painters have done the same for more or less a solid millennium. A selection of GW contrast lets me set these local colors in a quick, super organic, and perfectly integrated application that merges these two blocks of information in a single thing. And the same treatment with more compatible colors is used to enhance the saturation of the lights, and at the same time modulate the richness and fluidity of their internal tonal and value variations that at the moment are still a bit static and blocky. First, for the cold notes of the moon, synthesized by 3 hues, progressively lighter and colder. And then, working on the warmer shades of the flaming reflections with a similar 3-value and 3-color system. Thanks to all the overlaps and the fluid interconnection of colors, my tones are rich and richly modulated. And with, honestly, a minimal amount of effort, I have all the midtones, lower midtones, and every possible level of shadow already in place. All that is missing are the high and extreme lights, that, to build up new high values, have to be necessarily painted with opaque tones. This is the only quote-unquote limitation of working in the concrete, real world of pigments, and subtractive color theory. It doesn't matter what kind of paint you use. Luckily, this is also the super fun stage that wraps the whole work in a unifying, sharper definition, and that really sets the character of the paint job. As you can see at this point, I don't need any crazy variety or complexity on my palette. That part is already settled. I have 3 tones for the organic stuff. One warmer, one colder, and pure white for the extremes, and good measure. Their values are pretty close, because they are here mostly for their chroma, and altering their values is a job for the blue and red colors that represent my lights. 3 tones for the bluish spectrum are organized from darker and warmer to lighter and colder, to render the movement from the warmer shadows and the fading fires to the sensations of the bright, cold moon. And 3 colors for the red, organized with an opposite logic, from darker and colder to lighter and warmer, to simply render the fading of the intensity of the fire and the turn into the cold light from above. The beautiful part of painting a scene where light is the protagonist is that you are less bound by actual sculpted or physical shapes, and you can be incredibly painterly and abstract with your brushstrokes. Light bounces, bleeds, moves and dances freely, and to catch that feeling, the more you reason outside the shapes and the sculpt, like thinking of something almost liquid running over the model, the better. Painting a screaming goat man, we suddenly stepped into deep Empyrean territories. I love to work on this kind of concentrated cinematic scenes / mini dioramas. And it's really strange that this is the first time I caught one on video. We all have specific objectives for our paint jobs. Gaming, commissions, competitions, collection or content creation. And sometimes it's incredibly refreshing to paint something just for the sake of painting, and the creative act of bringing an idea into the physical world. It's also a great way to test concepts and techniques in a safe, quickly rewarding environment, or simply do something really different. And here is the final result. With a few less pictures than usual, because thanks to the GW extremely 2D sculpt, this whole project has been designed and engineered to be seen from just front and back. Let me know which models you want to see in a mini diorama in the next future. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!